In 1969, poet and literary critic, and also one-time professor of Rhodes College here in Memphis, then named Southwestern College, Robert Penn Warren published a collection of poems entitled Audubon, a Vision, inspired by the life and work of famous naturalist John James Audubon. In it, he writes this brief poem simply entitled, "Tell Me a Story." Long ago in Kentucky, I, a boy, stood by a dirt road in first dark and heard the great geese hoot northward. I could not see them, there being no moon, and the stars sparse. I heard them. I did not know what was happening in my heart. It was the season before the elderberry blooms. Therefore, they were going north. The sound was passing northward. Tell me a story. In this century and moment of mania, tell me a story. Make it a story of great distances and starlight. The name of the story will be time, but you must not pronounce its name. Tell me a story of deep delight. This last part of the poem is a striking moment when the speaker in the poem shifts from what seems to be an early memory and turns to the audience speaking to a fundamental aspect of being human, the desire to tell and to listen to stories. Stories are one of the most powerful tools we have, whether it is in olden times seated around a campfire or turning on our televisions to watch Netflix or listening to an audiobook in our headphones. Stories shape how we see the world and how we understand our place within it. They connect us with the past and they guide our future. Stories, as Warren writes, transport us from our own time and place to far-off lands, to great distances and starlight, and yet somehow have something to teach us about the here and the now. And as anyone who has played a simple game of telephone knows very well, stories shift and change through the years, oftentimes based on who is telling them and why they wish to tell them. They are both fixed, occupying a sacred space in our hearts, and yet fallible and ever-changing. Stories are at the core of who we are, and telling and retelling them is a powerful act. This week, we begin the book of Deuteronomy with Parshat Devarim. Moving into this book of the Torah is a bit of a strange transition. We stand in this liminal space of readying ourselves to enter the land that was promised so many books, chapters, and for us, months ago, preparing for what we know to be the end of the story, or this story at least. Yet, as we are ready for the end, we are forced to begin again. The English name of the book that we use, Deuteronomy, tells us as much, since it derives from the Greek title for the book, meaning second law. Deutero, second, nomos, law. As a whole, the book of Deuteronomy is a retelling of the Israelites' journey up to this point, with one of the major differences being that rather than being from an omniscient third-person perspective, this version of the story is told from the first-person perspective, with Moses as the narrator. And as careful readers, commentators, and critics have noticed for centuries, this shift doesn't merely lead to a change in verb tenses, from they or he or she to I, but it also includes different accounts of many of the moments we've read up to this point. It seems that the story, as Moses tells it, is slightly different from how we've heard it before. The text of Deuteronomy even points out this fact. In the last of the first 5 verses of the book, we read, "On the other side of the Jordan, in the land of Moab, Moses undertook to expound this Torah. He said," so on and so forth. This is a very telling description. It's not just that Moses retells or recounts what came before, he expounds, he interprets those laws and events. As Dr. Tammy J. Schneider explains in her commentary in the URJ's Women's Commentary, quote, "The word translated as undertook expresses a decision connected with a new initiative or a bold action." What is this new initiative? What is this bold action? She explains. The implication is that Moses initiates what becomes a long Jewish tradition, constant reinterpretation of the text. In an ironic and Jewish way, the Torah has already begun to be interpreted within its own text. In other words, through Moses' occasionally, let's say, different version of events, we see the beginning of the process of interpretation and reinterpretation that continues on for centuries up until and through today. In each retelling of the story, new and different meanings can arise, mostly based on the context and the ways in which these stories are told. They are fallible and they are flexible because we ourselves are fallible and flexible, emphasizing, downplaying, or highlighting different parts of these stories based on what we need to hear in a particular moment. Now, if we were to think that storytelling is simply the realm of novelists, comics, TV show creators, movie directors, and the like, we would be wrong. As scholars and critics like Hayden White have shown, even more fields of study that most think of as more objective, like history or even many of the social sciences, involve the process of storytelling. That's because we are humans, and in being humans, we are not computers. We can't process random data and plot points like a machine, but we need them to be woven together to help us make sense of them, to determine which things are relevant, which are not, which are connected, and which are not. This is especially true in history, where writers must ask not only what happened and how it happened, but also, where does this story begin? Where does it end? What are the important points in the middle that must be included? And perhaps most importantly, we ask the question, what does it mean for us? Is the history we tell a tragedy? Is it a comedy, a romance, a satire? Do we see the present as Robert Penn Warren did in his poem as, quote, a moment of mania? Or rather, do we see it as the beginning of something better? You see, stories are never just stories. They have immense power to shape our lives, our views, our politics, our values, everything. What do we see when, like Moses, we peer into the past and decide how we wish to recount it? What do we include in the story? What do we leave out? Stories are not just things that we tell, they lie at the core of our identities. They take moments, sights, sounds, smells, feelings, and weave them all together into the larger tale of our lives, the lives of loved ones and friends, and the overall life of our community, our city, our society. So to tell and retell a story, whatever that story may be, is truly a sacred act. Our tradition calls upon us to be storytellers, whether it means breathing new life into old stories or finding the best ways of telling our own. We each have a story to tell, whether it's one given to us by others or one we've shaped on our own. And so on this Shabbat, I call on us to tell those stories, however small and silly we may think them to be, and to listen to the stories of others. Let us tell stories of distances, great or small, of starlight, of times gone by and times that have yet to be. May we tell stories of kindness and compassion, of those we've lost and those we've never known. May we, like Moses, tell stories not with an eye to perfection in every detail, but with an understanding of who's listening and what we hope they will take away from it. Tell me a story. Make it a story of great distances and starlight. The name of the story will be time, but you must not pronounce its name. Tell me a story of deep delight. Shabbat Shalom.